The Byzantine Empire had a complex system of aristocracy and bureaucracy, which was inherited from the Roman Empire. At the apex of the hierarchy stood the emperor, who was the sole ruler and who was considered to be divinely ordained. Beneath him, a multitude of officials and court functionaries operated the complex administrative machinery that was necessary to run the empire. In addition to those officials, a large number of honorific titles existed, which the emperor awarded to his subjects or to friendly foreign rulers. Over the more than 1,000 years of the empire's existence, different titles were adopted and discarded, and many lost or gained prestige. At first, the various titles of the empire were the same as those in the late Roman Empire. However, by the time that Heraclius was emperor, many of the titles had become obsolete. By the time of Alexios I's reign, many of the positions were either new or drastically changed. However, from that time on they remained essentially the same until the fall of the Byzantine Empire in 1453. Background history. In the early Byzantine period, the system of government followed the model established in late Roman times under Diocletian and Constantine the Great, with a strict separation between civil and military offices and a scale of titles corresponding to office, where membership or not in the Senate was the major distinguishing characteristic. Following the transformation of the Byzantine state during the 7th century on account of massive territorial loss to the Muslim conquests, this system vanished, and during the classic, or middle period of the Byzantine state, a new, court-centered system emerged. In this, the new titles derived from older, now obsolete, public offices, and dignities of a certain level were awarded with each office. A senatorial class remained in place, which incorporated a large part of the upper officialdom, as every official from the rank of protospartharios was considered a member of it. During this period, many families remained important for several centuries, and several emperors rose from the aristocracy. Two groups can be distinguished: a metropolitan civil nobility and a provincial military one, the latter remaining regionally based and having large land holdings, but apparently no military forces of their own. In contrast to contemporary Western Europe, the 10th and 11th centuries saw a rise in importance of the aristocracy, and an increased number of new families entering it. The catastrophic losses in the latter 11th century again prompted a reorganization of the imperial administrative system, at the hands of the new Komnenos dynasty. The older offices and titles fell gradually into disuse, while an array of new honorifics emerged, which signified primarily the closeness of their recipients' familial relationship to the emperor. The Komnenian-led empire, and later their Palaeologan successors, were based primarily on the landed aristocracy, keeping the governance of state tightly controlled by a limited number of intermarrying aristocratic families. In the 11th and 12th century, for instance, some 80 civil and 64 military noble families have been identified, a very small number for so large a state. Finally, in the Palaeologan system as reported by Pseudo-Codinos, one can discern the accumulated nomenclature of centuries, with formerly high ranks having been devalued and others taken their place, and the old distinction between office and dignity had vanished. Imperial titles. These were the highest titles, usually limited to members of the imperial family or to a few very select foreign rulers, whose friendship the emperor desired. Titles used by the emperors: Basileus, the Greek word for sovereign, which originally referred to any king in the Greek-speaking areas of the Roman Empire. It also referred to the emperors of Persia. Heraclius adopted it to replace the old Latin title of Augustus in 629, and it became the Greek word for emperor. Heraclius also used the titles autocrator and kyrios. The Byzantines reserved the term Basileus among Christian rulers exclusively for the emperor in Constantinople, and referred to Western European kings as regas, a Hellenized form of the Latin word rex. The feminine form Basilissa referred to an empress. Empresses were addressed as Usubstate and were also called Curia or Despoina. Primogeniture, or indeed heredity itself, was never legally established in Byzantine imperial succession, because in principle the Roman emperor was selected by common acclamation of the Senate, the people and the army. This was rooted firmly in the Roman, republican, tradition, whereby hereditary kingship was rejected and the emperor was nominally the convergence of several officers of the republic onto one person. Many emperors, anxious to safeguard their firstborn sons' right to the throne, had them crowned as co-emperors when they were still children, thus assuring that upon their own death the throne would not be even momentarily vacant. In such a case the need for an imperial selection never arose. In several cases the new emperor ascended the throne after marrying the previous emperor's widow, or indeed after forcing the previous emperor to abdicate and become a monk. Several emperors were also deposed because of perceived inadequacy, e.g., after a military defeat, and some were murdered. Porphyrogenitos, born in the purple. Emperors wanting to emphasize the legitimacy of their ascent to the throne appended this title to their names, meaning they were born in the delivery room of the imperial palace, to a reigning emperor, and were therefore legitimate beyond any claim to the contrary whatsoever. Autocrator, self-ruler. This title was originally equivalent to imperator, and was used by the emperors. Titles used by the imperial family despots, Lord. This title was used by the emperors themselves since the time of Justinian I, and was an honorific address for the sons of reigning emperors. It was extensively featured in coins, in lieu of basileus. In the 12th century, Manuel I Komnenos made it a separate title, the highest awarded title after the emperor. The first such despot was actually a foreigner, Bela III of Hungary, signifying that Hungary was considered a Byzantine tributary state. In later times, a despot could be the holder of a despotate. For example, the despotate of Morea, centered at Mistra, was held by the heir to the Byzantine throne after 1261. The feminine form, despoina, referred to a female despot or the wife of a despot, but it was also used to address the empress. Sebastocrata, venerable ruler, a title created by Alexios I Komnenos as a combination of autocrator and Sebastis. The first Sebastocrata was Alexia's brother Isakios. It was essentially a meaningless title, which signified only a close relationship with the emperor, but ranked immediately after the despots. The feminine form was Sebastocrata. The first foreigner to be called Sebastocrata was Stefan Nemanjić of Serbia, who was given the title in 1191. A Bulgarian aristocrat by the name Kaloyan also used the title Kaiser, Caesar. Originally, as in the late Roman Empire, it was used for a subordinate co-emperor or the heir apparent, and was first among the awarded dignities. The office enjoyed extensive privileges, great prestige and power. When Alexios I created Sebastocrata, Kaiser became third in importance, and fourth after Manuel I created despots. The feminine form was Kaiserissa. It remained however an office of great importance, and was awarded to a few high-ranking and distinguished officials, and was only rarely awarded to foreigners. Justinian II named Tervel, Khan of the Bulgars, Kaiser in 705. The title then developed into the Slavic term Tsar or Tsar. Andronikos II Paleologos also named Roger de Flor, leader of the Catalan Grand Company, Kaiser in 1304. Nobillissimos, from the Latin nobilissimus. Originally a title given to close relatives of the emperor, subordinate only to the Kaiser. During the Komnenian period, the title was awarded to officials and foreign dignitaries, diluting its status. The title Protonobellissimos was created in its stead, until it too started to decline, only to be replaced by a further augmented form, Protonobellissimo Hypatatos. By the late Paleologan era, the former had vanished, while the latter was a provincial official. Couropalates, from the Latin cura palatii, charge of the palace. first attested in the time of Justinian I. It was the official in charge of the running of the imperial palace. However, the great authority and wealth deriving from this position, as well as the close proximity to the emperor, meant that it accumulated great prestige. It was awarded to important members of the imperial family, but from the 11th century onwards, it declined, and was usually awarded to the vassal rulers of Armenia and Georgia. Sebastus, August 1. This title is the literal Greek translation of the Latin term Augustus or Augustos, was sometimes used by the emperors. As a separate title it appeared in the latter half of the 11th century, and was extensively awarded by Alexios I Komnenos to his brothers and relations. The female version of the title was Sebasta. The special title Protosebastus was created for Hadrianos, Electia's second brother, and awarded also to the Doge of Venice and the Sultan of Iconium. During the 12th century, it remained in use for the emperors and the Sebastocrates' children, and senior foreign dignitaries. However, the parallel processes of proliferation and devaluation of titles during the 12th century resulted in the creation of a bewildering array of often ridiculously large variations. By using the prefixes pan, hyper, proto, examples include Pansebastis, Pan-Hypersebastis, or Hyper-Proto-Pansebasta Hypertatos. Few of them actually survived past the 12th century, and all of them rapidly declined in importance. Court titles from the 8th to 11th centuries. In the 8th–11th centuries, according to information provided by the Tacticon Uspensky, the Cletrologion of Philotheos and the writings of Constantine Porphyrogenitos, below the imperial titles, the Byzantines distinguished two distinct categories of dignities. The dignities by award, which were purely honorific court titles and were conferred by the award of a symbol of rank, and the dignities by proclamation, which were offices of the state and were conferred by imperial pronouncement. The former were further divided into three subcategories, depending on who was eligible for them. Different sets of titles existed for the bearded ones, the eunuchs and women. State officials usually combined titles from both main categories, so that a high official would be both magistris and logothetes to dromou. Titles for the bearded ones, the by award titles for the bearded ones, were, in descending order of precedence, proedros, president. Originally reserved for eunuchs, it was opened up in the mid-11th century to bearded ones, as well, especially military officials. Magistris. In the early Byzantine state, the magister officiorum was one of the most senior officials, but as his duties were gradually relegated to other officials, by the 8th century, only the title was left. It remained a high honor, and only rarely awarded until the 10th century. By the early 10th century, there were 12, the first in precedence among them bearing the title of proto-magistris. Thereafter the number of its holders was inflated, and the office vanished sometime in the 12th century. Vestarches, head of the Vestae, adopted in the latter half of the 10th century for high-ranking eunuchs. It was awarded to bearded senior military officers and judicial officials of Constantinople from California. 1050 on. It disappeared in the early 12th century. Vestes, senior honorific title, first attested under John I Zemiscus. Awarded to both eunuchs and non-eunuchs, it survived until the early 12th century. The term is etymologically connected to the vestarion, the imperial wardrobe. But despite earlier attempts to connect the Vestae and the related title of Vestarches, the head of the class of the Vestae, with the officials of the Vestarion, no such relation appears to have existed. Anthropatos, proconsul, originally the highest rank for provincial governors, it survived the creation of the theme system, until, in the 9th century, it too became a purely honorific title. The variant Protanthropatos was created in the 11th century to counter its decline in importance, but both disappeared by the end of the 12th century. Patrikios, patrician, established as the highest title of nobility by Constantine the Great. It remained one of the highest dignities until its disappearance in the Komnenian period, awarded to high-ranking officials, including eunuchs and foreign rulers. The spouses of patricians bore the title Patrikia, Proto-Spartharios, first Spartharios, as its name signifies. It originally was the title borne by the leader of the Spartharioi. For instance, in the 6th century Narses bore this title. It later became one of the most common high court titles, awarded to senior officials such as the Logothete, the commanders of the Imperial Tagmata, or the strategoir in charge of a theme. The title of Proto-Spartharios also signified admittance to the Senate. The office survived until the Paleologan period, but had declined to the 35th place of the hierarchy. Dyshypartos, twice consul, a very rare dignity, which originated possibly in the 8th century. Spatharo-candidatus, a portmanteau of the titles Spartharios and candidatus, both of which were types of palace guards in the 4th–6th centuries. The earliest references to the title occur in early 8th century, and the title is clearly attested only from the early 9th century on. Its distinctive badge was a golden chain worn around the chest. 1–3. Spartharios, Spathabearer. The title survived until the early 12th century. Hypartos, consul. As in the Roman Republic and Empire, the title was initially given each year to two distinguished citizens, until Justinian I halted the practice due to the extraordinary expenditure it involved. The title continued to be occasionally assumed by emperors on accession until the end of the 7th century. Honorary consuls, however, continued to be named, as attested by seals bearing the titles Hypartos or Apohypaton. The title was often conferred to the rulers of South Italian city-states. Strata, groom. Candidatus, from the Latin candidatus, so named because of their white tunics. They were originally a select group of guards, drawn from the Scoli Palatini. The title disappeared in the Komnenian period. Basilikos mandata, imperial messenger, vestita, were officers of the imperial wardrobe. Silentiarios, originally a group of courtiers responsible for the maintenance of order in the palace. Stratelates, a translation of the Latin Magister Militum, and Apoeparchant, a translation of the Latin Ex Praefectus. These two titles are listed as equal by Philotheos. Both were still high dignities in the 6th century, but were devalued afterwards. Titles for the eunuchs by descending order of precedence. The by award titles for the eunuchs were Proedros, President. This was an entirely new rank introduced in the 960s by Nikephoros II Phocas and first awarded to Basil Lekarpanos, the eunuch Parakoimomenos. The holder of this dignity was also the president of the Senate, and the term proedros was often used to denote precedence, e.g., proedros of the notarioi for the protonotarios. The title was widely awarded in the 11th century, when it was opened up to non-eunuchs, prompting the creation of the protoproedros to distinguish the most senior amongst its holders. It disappeared in the latter 12th century. Vestarches, adopted in the latter half of the 10th century for high-ranking eunuchs. It was awarded to bearded senior military officers and judicial officials of Constantinople from California. 1050 on. It disappeared in the early 12th century. Patrikios, the same as for the bearded ones. Vestes, the same as for the bearded ones. Praepositos, from the Latin praepositus, placed before. Protospartharios, the same as for the bearded ones. Primicarios, from the Latin primicerius, first in the list. Ostiarios, from the Latin ostiarius, doorkeeper, usher. Spatharopoubicularios, Calbicularios, from the Latin cubicularius, chamberlain. Nipsisturios, from Greek nu iota pi tau epsilon iota nu, to wash hands. The Nipsisturios was tasked with holding a gold gem-encrusted water basin and assisting the emperor in performing the ritual ablutions before he exited the imperial palace or performed ceremonies. There is also a single special title reserved for women, that of Zostopatrikia. This title was given to the Empress Ladies of Honor, and, according to Philotheos, ranked very high in hierarchy, above even the Magistros and Proedros and just below the Kouropalates. The title is known from the early 9th century, and disappeared in the 11th century. Otherwise women bore the female forms of their husbands' titles.